Welcome back to the Katie's House podcast. We are talking about money. This is the Normalized Money show and segment. My name is Kirsten VanderJagt, and I have co-host JulieAnn. Julie, how are you?
Very good.
Good. So today we are talking about the cost of an adult dependent. Last week at the Normalized Money show, we talked about the cost to raise a child from age 0 to 17. And we looked at that article, and it said that it was around $18,000 per year. And so if we were to break that down monthly, right, that is about $1,500 per month for one child. Now, I will tell you, having 4 children right now with childcare, just childcare alone for one child on average is $1,200 per month per child. So if you are a working adult and you have kids under the age of 5, of that $1,500 a month, you're probably giving childcare quite a lot of that. And it's going to be more than that. But today we're going to talk about, when you're in your middle age, I suppose. And so, of course, this show is for kids, really, and teenagers, but also adults that are in recovery, or even people who never had a personal finance class. And so if you're 20, 30, 40 years old, let's talk about like the raw lesson here, which is when you're 40 or 50, not only do you have a kid in college who you might be housing and feeding, but now you have a parent who's 70 or 80. And what happens with paying for them if they didn't save for their own retirement?
Or just the fact that you want to make sure that they have better care or care coming up. Because if they don't have those policies for long-term care, or they don't have anything other than Medicare, what do you do, and how much is it going to cost? Is it going to cost you out of your pocket, or is there some way of, kind of balancing that act of paying for your own responsibilities and then helping your parents who always helped you?
Definitely. And so this list that we're looking at, and we'll drop this link below this YouTube video, let's look at the monthly here. This is home care monthly rate for 22 days. And each state, so we're looking at upwards of $3,000 per month. And so you can help me, Julie. I look at you like you're an older sister and maybe you have more experience. And my parents passed away, so I'm not probably going to experience this. But does this mean that, let's say it's my aunt and she's living in her own room, maybe it's a shared house with another 3 people her age because she's 70 years old. And so now I'm having to pay for California $5,104 to have someone come into her bedroom for 22 days a month and help her do laundry and take a shower?
Well, I can tell you from my own experience that it's a lot of times. I mean, it's actually the best thing that you can do is to get a shared house where you have other people the same age living in the same type of situation, that they can have one person that they share. And that's obviously what we're here teaching people about, and doing that. And that this, as we had a small discussion earlier, this actually came up years ago because the baby boomers came, and I was into this, where a lot of the people that I knew they had a house in Indiana, and they had put their grandmother in there, and 3 or 4 other people, and each person paid for the room. And they had a care worker that came in because they all didn't need high level care. They just needed to make sure that people were being checked on, that their medicines were being properly put in, their caddies, that they were not falling in the bathroom, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm dealing with now where my father having his own house, but my mother passed away recently. And now there's nobody checking on my father. There's nobody, doing some of the things that I would want for me. If it was me by myself, he's older. So These costs here are literally having somebody just come to the house and do those simple tasks. And I think a lot of people at this point are trying to do that as a family member. We're trying to live our own lives at our own house, but then we go and take care of our family members as much as we can, which now we're splitting. We talked earlier about time, right? We talked about time and how we're really struggling with spreading our time out. And I think that's really what you're paying here for, is that you can't just, everybody can't sustain themselves after a certain age. We do need to check on our elders. We do need to take care of people when they get older. And that's the hard part, right? I mean, it costs money. And I don't know how to get around it. It really is a hard conversation sometimes to, you don't want it to cost money, but it definitely costs a fair, I mean, I would have to say that $5,000 is something that you say is, a lot, but that probably doesn't even touch on food or any of these other things that costs on a regular basis, electricity, stuff like that.
So let's talk about the alternative as it relates to shared housing and Katie's House Foundation. And something that people don't know, actually, that I haven't disclosed, is that about 5 years ago, when I really wanted to start getting into shared housing, it was because of this topic, is that when you have an older adult who you care about and nobody told you about long-term care, or they didn't take the time to learn about long-term care and get that type of an insurance policy, because it's so far in the future, people, they tend to think insurance, if they're not going to use it, why pay for it? But the truth is that it saves you this much money. And so maybe your parent or grandparent doesn't have that kind of insurance, but they certainly should have it. And so let's now fast forward. Now they don't have it. They're 65 years old, 70 years old. And let's say that their husbands have passed away. They're a group of girlfriends, or even guys, and maybe, their wives have passed away, but basically maybe there was divorce in the mix. And so, they don't have a secondary income source to rely on. And Social Security was never intended to be a full-time income. It's just supposed to be supplemental for food. But what we see at the foundation is that, people are living off of just their disability income and just their Social Security, which is, maybe $1,200 a month. And so that's why we, of course, pick up houses and then we sublet the rooms to 1 or 2 people in each room, which then gives them that company with somebody in their age group, give or take, depending on the purpose of the house. And so let's talk about low level of care, where you're saying you can have, let's say, four people. They're all in their own bedroom. So you get a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, and maybe you have an extra space, like a dining space, where a caretaker could even live there, actually. And then they could share the cost of that. It becomes almost a full-time employee, right? Because they're doing their medications, they're giving them baths, they're doing their laundry. I mean, they've got to stay clean. And also, that's not even the skilled nursing people who come in to do like higher level stuff, like oxygen tanks and things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the low level of care, I think, is where people start. They see that number and they think that that's doable. And then they, come to find out that the people that sometimes choose those jobs are not doing what they're paid to do. So I think a lot of times families just choose to go back to try to take care of their loved ones on their own until they actually have to find a bigger facility to do it, which then at that point, you have to start taking those plans and figuring out, where's this money coming from and how are we going to do this? Because even in my dad's situation, like right now, there isn't any reason that any of us have to give up our lives to either go live with my dad, or they have to not have him at that place and they have him at their house, like literally the person moves into the person's house. So I think that's where the shared housing is relieving that situation, right? They're having that social interaction. They're not just family members, and they're allowing those people to interact without feeling like they're in a you know, how do you want to say, like a rehab center, or like literally an old folks home, as they always called it. That was always the stigma when I was a kid. I didn't want to go to the old folks home because it smelled.
It's almost normalizing shared housing again, right? Where it used to be you'd have multiple generations until you just couldn't. So we're at the 10-minute mark right now. And as it relates to the dollars and cents around how much does it cost to take care of an older loved one in shared housing, whether it's a house that you own or, if you were to get involved with Katie's House Foundation, very clearly here, it seems to me that you could have a few people living in a house plus having a live-in caretaker who is accountable. Their housing as it becomes accountable to some way or something like that, that is going to be much more financially beneficial. And also the mental health. You just said that your family, doesn't have to, it's not impacting your lives. But I know that for some people, their mental health is really impacted by just like being underwater financially and then emotionally when you're going through these kinds of situations because you feel like you don't have an alternative, but there are alternatives. So I hope people will stay with us as far as subscribing as we continue going through more into all of this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that, when it comes back to, if we're going to circle about finances and things, these are the kind of things that we do need to kind of look at and force ourselves to think about once in a while, because these are the costs that it is for certain situations, right? So we need to pay attention to how much it costs to raise a kid, how much it costs to make sure that our parents are taken care of, how much it costs for just our daily living expenses, and if we're making good decisions or not. So
Yeah,
like
and
and subscribe, and talk to us down below, make us some comments. We'd love to hear from you.
absolutely. On that note, also insurance, right? We got to bring that up pretty soon here in this class. Making sure that you understand insurance, even though it can be awfully boring. We are going to dig into that as the show continues, because when you have good insurance for $50 a month and you think you're throwing it away, and then all of a sudden you use it, right, and it saves you $5,000 a month, you're like, thank God I had that insurance. So make sure you stay with us. And Julie, thanks for the great conversation today. I'll talk with you next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.